Welcome, everyone, to another DBrief episode. I'm Jeff Smart, your 2024 president of Washington REALTORS. And today I'm excited to introduce a very special guest, Dr. Jessica Lautz. Dr. Lautz serves as Deputy Chief Economist and Vice President of Research at the National Association of REALTORS. She's been with NAR since 2007, where she leads critical research initiatives and provides expert analysis on housing trends and consumer behavior. Dr. Lautz holds a doctorate of real estate from Nottingham Trent University in the UK, a master's in public policy from American University, and an undergraduate degree in political science and law and justice from Central Washington University. Her work has not only influenced policymakers, but has also been featured in major media outlets. She's a sought-after speaker, known for her deep insights into the housing market. Today, Dr. Lautz will share her expertise and provide a general economic outlook, important information for our designated brokers and real estate leaders. We're all looking forward to a comprehensive and enlightening discussion. Well, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Jessica Lautz.
Thank you so much. That was a really nice introduction. And I have to say, I'm really happy to be here with you all. I'm actually from Washington State originally, lived in Burien and when I was in middle school, and then I moved to Cleellum and actually went to Central Washington University right there in Ellensburg. So really nice to be here with you today and to share data here from our beautiful capital in Washington, D.C. So let me share my screen and jump in to the latest and greatest that we have in the real estate market. So I'll preface this by saying I am going to be speaking on a national basis of what we are seeing. And I know that your local market in many areas, all of the places that I just named, Burien to Cleellum to Ellensburg, are all going to behave differently right now with home buyers and sellers. I know that talking to local realtors in each one of those areas, it's very interesting right now, the dynamic that is going on. We're still seeing migration flow into some areas, especially when we think about affordability conditions. Now, something when I say affordability and inventory is something that honestly every area of this country is feeling right now is just the crunch, the lack of inventory, the lock-in effect that is still happening with higher mortgage interest rates compared to interest rates just a couple years ago. So let me jump in and show you what I've got. One of the things that I like to start with, especially right now, when we think about the real estate market, is that you're tuning in right now. You want to be the best of the best. And it is very difficult to do that right now. When we think about the competition in the marketplace, there are very few transactions that are happening. It is a very dynamic industry, and people are jumping in and they jump out and they try real estate, especially in a hot market where interest rates are at where they are, but we know that home prices are still going up. When home prices are going up, when home sales activity ramps up, especially in the spring, we know that it's an interesting perspective for a lot of people to join. So since 2020, when we think about the hot market of that time period, until today, 27% of NAR members have started since that time period. We know that the typical years of experience is 11. But when we think about just those who jump in and they try and start out in this business and they try and learn as much as they can, they're relatively new into the industry, gaining all of that knowledge they possibly can. Most offices, firms, actually, most real estate firms just have one real estate office and they're operating with just 3 full-time licensees. So going to your state association, grabbing all of the information that you can from them, so incredibly helpful to have this as a resource. So as we look at the real estate market overall, I have to say it's a really interesting market right now. We know that home sales activity is the lowest level since 1995. Spring has not been the hot spring that we really expected it to be. We all expected that interest rates would be coming down, that we'd see more home sales activity really ramping up. We are seeing that more people are listing their homes on the market today in comparison of the end of 2023 in the dearth of winter. But we know that perhaps those potential home sellers who are listing their homes in the marketplace right now are those who have to move. There's something in their life that has changed, and that lock-in effect of lower interest rates that they may have versus the higher interest rates of today is actually saying, you know what, the potential in my household, whether that's a new job or a new family change, it doesn't matter. I do have to make the move now. But if we look at just the inventory of 1995 versus 2023, ending that year, we can see that there is a substantial decline in housing inventory over that time period, while there has been a growth of 70 million Americans in this country. So it's really just not matching the population that we currently have. We also know that bidding wars are continuing to happen, more than a quarter of homes moving more than the asking price, even as interest rates are higher because of this lack of housing inventory. So there's still a lot of demand in the market. When we look at mortgage interest rates, what we can see, and they were just released, they're released every Thursday on a weekly basis. And from Freddie Mac, we know that interest rates are just about 7% today. And they've been bouncing around there for a number of weeks now. And as we see interest rates in range, we know that lock-in effect is real. So I want to spin this data on its head a little bit. And I want to give you what I would say is just kind of a reality check. When we look at the red bar, that is the historical average of interest rates dating back to 1971. And that's 7.74%. So we're actually below that right now. And we have been for an extended period of time. As we look at that, I think it's really important to note the average historically versus where people may think that interest rates could go in that 2 and 3% range. It's just very unlikely that consumers are ever going to see those anytime soon unless something really drastic happens in the country. And when it does, if it does, we should be concerned about that and not necessarily mortgage interest rates. The other thing that I think is really important to note too is that while 2 and 3% is not normal, we also know that interest rates in that 18% range is also not normal. So there's a lot of fodder about talking about interest rates of, oh, well, when I was your age, I purchased a home at 18%. That's also not normal when we look at this line here and look at where the troughs are and also the highs in the data. The other thing that I think is important to note is, well, home prices have gone up and interest rates have gone up. The consumer who can purchase a home right now is substantially wealthier than they have been in the past. In fact, the typical first-time home buyer has a household income that is $25,000 more in just 1 year. And this does mean that these first-time home buyers not only are higher income earner, we also know that they are more likely to have stocks, more likely to use cryptocurrency, more likely to use their 401k or pension plan for their down payment than they had in the past. And the reason why is because they're a little bit older, they're more likely to have these assets. So it's a different kind of buyer today than we have had in past years as a first-time home buyer. The other thing that I think is really important to note in this real estate market is that there's still a lot of demand. So even though we know that home prices have gone up, interest rates have gone up from that historic low, we also know that there's plenty of consumers in the market and we're continuing to see bidding wars. The typical home that was listed last month had just over 3 offers on that home, and that's higher than the historical norm of 2.4. So we know that there is plenty of demand in this real estate market, and some of this is actually coming from all cash buyers. We know that 28% of the market last month was actually all cash buyers, and this is a share that's been trending higher for more than 19 months now. We know that it's been more than a quarter of the market. If we look at the most recent high, it was actually closer to a third of the market was paying all cash. It is really striking to see the amount of housing equity that consumers have right now. We know that homeowners are really the winners in today's housing market because as we're looking at home prices going up and reaching all-time highs on different monthly basis, we know that homeowners who have been in their homes for longer periods of time are just continuing to earn that housing equity. So while we have a housing market where there's a lot of people who are saying, you know what, I may have to remodel, this house isn't working for me anymore. We also have a housing market where there's a lot of homeowners who are saying, oh, well, if this house doesn't work for me because I do have a new job, or I want to be closer to my grandbaby, or you know what, I have a family change and this is going to propel me to move. These homeowners are able to do so with a very large down payment and be able to move into the home that they want to be in with that sizable down payment or even paying all cash, especially if they're moving to a more affordable housing market. And that's something we're seeing a lot of, that this not only older buyers, but long distance buyers. We're seeing investors. We're seeing a lot of all cash buyers from all different parts of the marketplace. The other thing that I think is important to note too is that there's a lot of fodder, especially if I open social media, of, well, I'm just going to wait. I'm going to wait until home prices drop. I'm going to wait because there's bubbles going to burst and we're going to see distressed sales coming into the market. That's not our expectation. And when we look at the data, what we can see is that in the last month, just 2% of homes that sold were actually distressed sales. So foreclosures or short sales. We know that this is very unlikely to happen because inventory is tight. Lending is very tight. It is very hard to obtain a mortgage today. But we also know the dynamics of the marketplace just wouldn't allow for this because we know that home prices are going up. And so consumers who are in their homes are earning housing equity. So even if there was a shock into that household, it is very unlikely that that consumer would be selling as a foreclosure or a short sale, not likely to happen. There may be limited pockets in the country where that could happen if there was a lot of layoffs, but it's just very, very unlikely to happen as a widespread scale. We're just not seeing it in our data, but we're not seeing in outsiders' data as well from other companies. So the other thing I want to give you too here is just a couple of demographic changes, because I think it's quite important when we look at the housing market to see where we're coming from and where future demand is going to be coming from as well. So when we look at the US population overall, I think it's really interesting as we look at this chart. So the great pandemic kiddos born in the last couple of years, as the bars get shorter, you can see that there's fewer people who are making it into their 90s or so. They eventually become ghosts or they go to heaven. Those are the two options that I know on the table. And as we look at this chart, I want to pull out a couple of things here. The millennial generation is the biggest generation in the US, and you can see them in blue. So this is the very large generation right there in the middle. As we look at this, the first red bar is the median age of 35 years old. That's the median age of a first-time home buyer today. As we look at that, what I want you to shift over to is looking at late 20s to early 30s, and you can see this population boom there. It is the most popular age in this country is to be 33 years old. So if you are 33, you're competing against a lot of people in the housing market, but also in the rental market. If we think about the age of a first-time home buyer being 35, that's actually towards the oldest we've ever seen it. The first-time home buyer, if we look back 40 years ago, was actually in their late 20s. So thinking about this first-time home buyer, they may be trying to enter into the housing market for a number of years before they're actually successfully getting there because of lack of inventory, because of affordability. The other thing I want to shift to too is that there's a lot of questions about if we build more housing inventory, do we actually need this housing inventory, or are we going to be building too much today and we're not going to have a population for this tomorrow? Well, I would shift your eyes even further into the green. There is plenty of population. And in fact, you can see in late teens to early 20s, you can see another population boom that's going to be putting further pressure onto the housing market as we move forward in the next 10 years. I want to shift over now to the yellow. And right now in 2024, even the youngest boomer is turning the age of 60. And I think we're at a really critical time point where we're seeing a lot of boomers in the housing market. And in fact, we know that they are the second biggest generation of home buyers today and the largest generation of home sellers. The second red bar is the median age of a repeat buyer today, and that's 58 years old. That's also towards the oldest that we've ever seen a repeat buyer. If we look back historically, the median age of a repeat buyer was just 36 years old. So essentially the age of a first-time home buyer today. It means a lot of less housing equity for that individual, but we also know that it's potentially less moves on the table, thinking about that first-time home buyer being older, perhaps looking for a single-family home in a suburban area versus a condo in the city center. But at 58, we also know that that repeat buyer could be looking for something a little bit different as well. So perhaps looking for a place that they can age in place, planning on living there for 15 to 20 years. We know that for baby boomers. So this is a really critical time as we think about the housing market, these two really big generations putting a lot of pressure on the housing market for different intentions within that property. Looking at just the shares of generations in the housing market, I touched on this, but I think visually it's quite interesting to look at this over the last 11 years here. And we can see the blue is the millennial generation, so keeping the colors the same. We know that they were the biggest generation of home buyers for 8 years. They declined severely last year, and now they have rebounded. Not quite as high as they were, but they have rebounded some. Baby boomers still quite active in the housing market, really playing a big role. Gen Xers didn't touch on them at all. They're wedged in between these two big generations, but they're slow and steady in the housing market. They're about a quarter of the housing market. Very interesting generation to look at as they're in their peak earning years, thinking about perhaps purchasing a home that they're going to have not only for themselves and their nuclear family unit, but also they're the most likely generation to be caring for elderly relatives, have young adults boomeranging back as well. I just want to touch on the agent role. There's a lot of headlines out there. There's a lot of misinformation that's being placed out there, but I think it's a really important to just understand that the role of the agent is critical in the home buying and selling process. And we know that buyers want agents today. When we look at the data, we see that in the last year, 89% of buyers did use an agent in their home buying process. They wanted an agent to not only find the right home, but to guide them through that process, help with negotiation, and get them into that perfect dream home that they actually want. It is a very competitive real estate market today, and the agent plays a critical role in really bridging that gap and bringing that buyer into the home. We also know on the selling side, 89% of sellers using an agent in their home sales process, wanting that agent to show every aspect from fixing up their home for sale, pricing that home competitively, finding that qualified buyer, and getting them to that closing table in the time frame they want. Seller's agent being very critical in that process. FSBO, for sale by owner, just 7% of sales last month, or last year rather. And we actually know that half of those are arm's length transaction. They knew that buyer, so it's not really an open market FSBO. I want to just underline, when we look at the housing market, when we look at homeownership, we know that this is not just a place to live. This is the nest egg for most Americans. In fact, the typical net worth of a homeowner is nearly $400,000 compared to that of a renter of just over $10,000. It's 40 times the net worth. Really important when we think about the future of that particular homeowner and what they're going to do with that nest egg. So with that, I will turn it back to Jeff, but thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. That's some incredible information, and I'm sure all of our members are going to really appreciate that. I wanted to throw in a couple follow-up questions for you, put you on the spot here. So given the economic and real estate outlooks that you just shared, what should realtors focus on to be the best support for their clients?
I think having the real facts is really important right now. There's a lot of misinformation. Knowing where you get your source of your information is incredibly important. Knowing what's behind that information, making sure that you trust that information before you pass that on to consumers. Because it's a crowded market out there with data. It's a crowded market with headlines. It's a crowded market with policy information. So understanding, do I trust this? And do I feel comfortable sharing this with consumers? I think is really critically important.
That's extremely important, and understanding what you're reading and finding the absolute truth, especially with anything dealing out there in the news right now. Are there any specific policy changes or market conditions that realtors should be aware of that might be coming up in the next couple months?
Well, I think everyone is aware of what's going on in the real estate market right now. What I would direct people towards is competition.realtor and facts.realtor. We know that with the lawsuits that are pending settlement, that those that information is out there and it is changing, but it's important to get the latest and greatest. And those two websites, competition.realtor and facts.realtor, are the best places that you can grab that information. I am certain that Washington State has its own information source as well, but from NAR, those are the two best websites that you can grab.
That's great. That's great. Thank you so much. Well, I want to thank you, Dr. Lautz. for such an informative presentation. This was great information. Our members appreciate your insights, and these real estate trends are invaluable for us as we navigate the complexities of our current marketplaces. So, Washington Realtors, we hope you found this episode as enlightening as we did. The data and trends shared by Dr. Lautz will undoubtedly help us make more informed decisions and better serve our clients. If you have any further questions or need more information, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can find additional resources and updates on our website, warealtor.org, and at nar.realtor. And be sure to follow us on social media channels for the latest news and updates. Stay tuned for our next debrief session, where we will continue to bring you the latest updates and trends impacting real estate. Until then, stay informed, stay engaged, and continue to provide exceptional service to your clients. Thank you for being a Washington Realtors member.